Before I get into today's episode, did you know you can ask me questions? If you're watching this on YouTube, you can just leave them in the comments below. But if you're listening to the podcast episode, you can email them in to Darren, Darren, at dailymasonicprogress.com. Or you can go to dailymasonicprogress.com and there's a link on the website to be able to get in touch with me. All right, on to today's episode. What if one day a brother said to you, I'm tired of this. I'm starting a lodge at my house. We're going to focus on education, great degree work, and spend real quality time together over a beer and the footy. We don't need Grand Lodge, don't need a charter, and we're going to do Freemasonry as we believe Freemasonry should be done. Would you come and join us? Now, this thought experiment was put to the readers of Emeth, which is a Masonic newsletter written by Most Worshipful Brother Cameron Bailey, past Grand Master of the Most Worshipful Grand Lodge of Washington in the United States. And I thought this was quite a surprising experiment to come from a Grand Master. Now, I've seen this debate come up several times over the years. The justification is that lodges prior to 1717, when the first Grand Lodge was founded, just met. They didn't have a charter. They existed in their own right without permission from anyone. And the debate on this matter is really about the need for a Grand Lodge. And this debate rears its head from time to time, and it's usually when someone disagrees with something that the Grand Lodge did or didn't do. Now, as an individual Mason, but more importantly, to give you some full disclosure, I'm a Grand Lodge officer. And I'm a member of the Board of Management as well for the United Grand Lodge of New South Wales and ACT. But remember, this is my own. And anything that I say is not that of a Grand Lodge, not that of a Masonic body. It doesn't represent anyone else other than my own personal views. Plus, I do have a bit of a unique view on the world. And this has allowed me to coin the term the Grand Lodge paradox. And the paradox is this: Masons and lodges are always going to blame Grand Lodge. They're going to say that they're not doing anything, not doing enough, or doing too much. And then when Grand Lodge does something, the response is, go away, we're private lodges, or we don't want to do that. What this is, really, it's the international sport of blaming the government. Whether it's Freemasonry, football, your local municipality, the state, the federal government, really, any governing body of any kind, it's just going to happen. It's the duality of the matter. But this does raise an important question. What's the actual relationship between Masons, lodges, and the Grand Lodge? And the answer to this little thought experiment that our Most Worshipful Brother posed. Let's start with this thought experiment. Now, regardless of how Freemasonry was or wasn't governed prior to 1717, the lodges at that point in time made a decision to formalize Freemasonry and form a Grand Lodge. And by forming a Grand Lodge, they transferred power and responsibility to a governing body to administer the craft on their behalf. And this is an irrevocable epoch in time. You see, anything thereafter must be under the jurisdiction of a Grand Lodge. Now, wait a moment. The question always comes up because of governance issues. Now, let's just put governance issues aside, because the challenge of why do we need Grand Lodges is always related to governance issues. But let's first look at who is the Grand Lodge. It's not the Grand Master, and it's not those Grand Officers wearing blue and gold. You see, the Grand Lodge is actually the lodges. The lodges are individual Masons. Just on the Grand Master, he's an individual Mason from a lodge, and he's elected by his brethren and fellows who represent their lodges. So when those original lodges, when they formed a Grand Lodge, what they did was they created a single identity. But it also then gave themselves the ability to control that identity and allow for expansion. They created the first blockchain network. So all those crypto bros, you're 300 years late to the party. Now, it's fair to say that Freemasonry likely wouldn't exist today if there wasn't a mechanism to create new lodges, the individual Masons that came from within it. Now, before I go any further, one of the key things that these four lodges did was create a perpetual cycle. You see, the way to expand Freemasonry was that men would come into those 4 lodges, and they would come out Masons. And when they wanted to go and create a new lodge because it was getting too full, they then had a mechanism to go and create another lodge. And what that meant was, if one of the lodges that they all came from happened to succumb to time and circumstance and cease to exist, well, they had this mechanism to keep perpetuating the cycle and creating new lodges, thus keep Freemasonry going. So that forming of a Grand Lodge is absolutely critical to the success of Freemasonry over time and to our everlasting endurance. Now, before I go any further, what makes a lodge a lodge? Well, this is a quote from our initiation ceremony, and it's given by the master to the candidate. This is our charter, warrant, or constitution. Under it, this lodge has its existence, regularly holds its meetings, and duly administers the rites and ceremonies of ancient Freemasonry. So, do you want to know what a warrant really is? Well, it's actually a franchise agreement. Yep, the business model of McDonalds, franchises, is modelled off Freemasonry. Think about it. When you have a franchise, you get a license, you get branding, and you get the recipe to produce McDonald's, or in our case, Freemasonry. So let's go back to that thought experiment for a moment. You see, anyone can open up their own burger restaurant and have friends over for burgers on a barbecue. But unless you have that franchise agreement, aka the charter from Grand Lodge, you're not Freemasonry. You can't just open up a burger restaurant on any corner, slap the golden arches on it and say McDonald's, because you're not, even if you make the burgers the exact same way. And don't believe me? Well, in the first degree examination, it said that we know ourselves to be Masons by the regularity of my initiation. You see, you follow the pattern and you put the logo on things, but unless it comes from a warranted lodge, I mean, it's like making a fake Rolex. Anyone can go and buy a fake Rolex from overseas, but unless it's come from the factory with the certificate of authenticity, it's not real. Now, let's focus on the thing that really matters here. And that's the relationship between Masons, lodges, and Grand Lodges, because this is often confused by everyone. If you look at your book of constitutions, you'll find that a Grand Lodge is primarily responsible for one thing, and that's warranting lodges. Everything else after that is all secondary, and it's all in support of warranting lodges. Now, a lodge is private. It's a separate discussion, but really private lodges are a misnomer. The correct term is really warranted lodges. Is a franchisee a private McDonald's restaurant? Nope. But they are private businesses from each other. So it's kind of where the confusion comes in. Now, what about individual Masons? Where do we fit into this? Well, fun fact, Grand Lodge is not technically responsible for individual Masons. You see, when the first Grand Lodge was founded, there was a special power they reserved for themselves as lodges, which they didn't give to the Grand Lodge. You see, only a lodge can make a Mason. A Grand Lodge can't make a Mason. Now, I'm going to park for another time the Grand Master making a Mason on site. That's a completely different ballgame. But the thing to remember is that Grand Lodges make lodges. Lodges make Masons. And then Masons go to Grand Lodge in order to make more lodges. Lodges at the very beginning are who made a Grand Lodge. And they did so a Grand Lodge can make lodges, for those lodges to make Masons, for those Masons to travel in their lodges, and then to form Grand Lodges where they traveled to. And why do they do this? Well, because the ancient landmarks say that every Mason ought to be gainfully employed, and he can only be employed by a lodge. As much as we might like to throw mud at Grand Lodge for what they do or didn't do, at the end of the day, we created them. And there was that irrevocable point in history, which meant Grand Lodges are going to be there forever. Because at the end of the day, the thing to keep in mind is Grand Lodges, whether we like them or not, are what continue to perpetuate Freemasonry. The charters are issued by them, the charters are surrendered by them, and they can keep the process going. Ask yourself this, what's more important? A little governance dispute or a disagreement that you didn't think the Grand Lodge did the right thing? Making sure Freemasonry is around for another 1,000 years. I'll leave that to you. Now, if you thought this was interesting and maybe this has sparked a couple of questions that you have, feel free to send me an email, Darren@dailymasonicprogress.com, or drop them in the YouTube comments below. If you've got something else that's come to mind, or maybe something that's happened in Lodge recently that you want to know about, ask me as well. I'd be more than happy to answer for you.
This has been the Daily Masonic Progress Podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, make sure you follow us on Spotify or subscribe on Apple Podcasts. The Daily Masonic Progress Podcast is available on all streaming platforms with new episodes every week.